Hey, Dan Beagleman here. In this video, Modes Summary, I'll cover the main bullet points of each particular mode for understanding and applying them in a playing situation. The 7 modes are the Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. I'll talk about the chemistry of the mode, in other words, the sequence of steps that give each mode its unique characteristic sound, the correct chord or chords and key to use each particular mode in, mixing the modes with the pentatonic and blues scales. Remember, there are only 2 pentatonic scales, major and minor, and 2 blues scales, major and minor. So mixing the modes with the correct pentatonic and or blues scales will give you more options for playing, more ideas and just a lot more stuff to have at your fingertips. We'll also talk about the correct genre of music to use each particular mode in, as there are 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, 4 minor sounding modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, and 1 dominant sounding mode, the Mixolydian. So the point is, it might work better in a specific music genre than another, even though they might be of the same type. In other words, whether they're major, minor, etc. We'll also talk about looking at the modes from different perspectives. In other words, there are a few different ways to think about the modes or how to access them. So I'll cover a few different ways to look at the modes, as I said, and that will hopefully make them a little bit easier to understand. If the study of modes is new to you, I hope you'll enjoy this video and, most importantly, start to be able to use them to enhance your playing. If the study of modes is not new to you, I hope you'll still enjoy this video, and maybe you'll find something new, something you haven't thought about before, like another way to think about the modes or how to apply them. For a deeper dive into the modes, check out my 7 videos on each of the modes, where I'll really go into more detail and use musical examples for highlighting how each mode will sound in a certain music genre. And also check out my video on the pentatonic and blues scales, which will do a deep dive into the pentatonic and blues scales, different patterns for them, playing both vertically and horizontally across the fingerboard, and also mixing the pentatonic and blues scales with the correct mode. So, on to the mode summary. 1, 2, 3. What is it about each particular mode that gives it its unique characteristic sound? Every mode, every scale has a formula or sequence of steps that will create its unique sound. Here's a C major scale in 2 octaves, position 7. C major scale, no sharps, no flats. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, if I play the first octave for starting on C, that's a C major scale or a C Ionian mode. As I mentioned, they're synonymous. The major scale is the first mode, the Ionian mode. So again, C to C is a C Ionian mode. No sharps, no flats. If I start on the second tone, which is D, and go to the octave, the next D note, and return to the D note again, I didn't change any notes as far as sharps or flats. I just started and ended on the 2nd degree of that scale. That's a Dorian mode. In other words, the Dorian mode is just the 2nd mode of the major scale, and it sounds different because the sequence is different. The Ionian mode is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. The Dorian mode is whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. Each of the other modes sounds different because, as I said, the sequence of the pattern changes. So just by playing for 1 octave, starting on each of the successive degrees of the scale, I'll get each of these 7 modes. So here's all 7 modes. C to C is the C Ionian mode. D to D is the D Dorian mode. E to E is the E Phrygian mode. F to F is the F Lydian mode. G to G is the G Mixolydian mode. A to A is the A Aeolian mode. B to B is the B Locrian mode. And if I just do, starting the next note, I'll just repeat the octave of the Ionian. So again, you could hear each of these 7 modes sound completely different, or again has its own unique characteristic sound, because the pattern of steps, whole and half, changes. Each of the 7 modes has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, but it's because the pattern changes. That's what gives it its own unique characteristic sound. Now, a mode can fall into one of 3 categories or types of chords that it will work with: major, minor, or dominant. To make your basic major or minor chord, you take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the scale, and that will create the type of chord that you will have. In other words, if I take from that C Ionian mode or C major scale, if I take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note, which is C, E, and G, that gives me a C major chord. So the C Ionian mode, or any Ionian mode, will work with a major chord. If I go from the 2nd note, as I said, the D, and play the D Dorian, but just look at the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note from here. In other words, hit a note, skip one, hit a note, skip one, play the next note, and then skip a note and hit it. So you have, that's obviously sounds minor, because that's comprising a D minor chord, D, F, and A. If I do the same thing from E, I'm playing E, G, B, which is a E minor chord. If I start from F, that's an F major chord, F, A, C. And on the G note, the Mixolydian, it sounds major, but since the Mixolydian dominant family is a 4-part chord, it's going to have the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and the flat 7th to give it more of a, a dominant chord sound. Remember, the dominant chord family is the like the bluesy sounding chords, 7ths, 9ths, 13ths, things like that. Okay. Anyway, each of the 7 modes has a unique sound, because if you take the triads built from each of the modes, it'll put it into its particular category. Getting into the weeds here a little bit, but the point is, each of the 7 modes belongs to one of 3 categories. The 2 major sounding modes are Ionian and Lydian. The 4 minor sounding modes are Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And the 1 dominant sounding mode is the Mixolydian. Okay, I'll get into a little bit more of this later in this video and show you, how to apply the particular mode to a particular genre. Now I'm going to play all 7 modes starting on C, and I'll be in the same position on the fingerboard, and obviously the fingering pattern is going to change because I'm going to be relating them all to the same root note, but because of the sequence of steps changing, as again, the order of the whole steps and half steps, my left hand fingering is going to have to change. Here's the first mode, Ionian. Here's the second mode, Dorian. Again, all of these are going to be C as the key center, or have C as my key center. So here's a C Dorian mode. Here's a C Phrygian mode. Here's a C Lydian mode. Here's a C Mixolydian mode. Here's a C Aeolian mode. And here's a C Locrian mode. As you can hear, all 7 modes sound quite different from each other, and again, it's because the sequence of steps, whole and half, is different for each one. So that's one way you can use the modes or learn the modes, is by learning a particular fingering pattern. But there are other ways, I'll show you as the video goes on, to think about the modes and apply them or access them in different ways and different fingering patterns. I first learned about the modes many years ago when I was giving guitar lessons in a local music shop in Queens, New York. I had never heard of the modes. I had no idea what they were. Never even heard the word modes, for that matter. I was playing like most guitar players, coming up, learn that basic pentatonic scale, the blues scale, and it would suit you well for soloing for lots of applications. Actually, the pentatonic and blues scales, if that's all you ever knew, I say this to my students sometimes, if you only knew the pentatonic scales, major and minor, and never learned anything else, you can play great solos to any type of music, rock, blues, jazz, country, anything. But the modes really just give you more options and increase your more stuff in your musical toolbox. Anyway, I remember many years ago, as I said, before I knew the modes, I used to play patterns. I would hear things on records and figure things out, noodling around, and I would play notes that were not in the pentatonic scales, but I would say, hey, wow, these things sound good, but I don't know what they are. I didn't have a name for them. I just knew, like fingering, hey, okay, da-da-da-da-da, play that fingering pattern, sounds good, sounds like part of the guitar solo from, such and such a song. But again, not knowing what they were. One day, while giving lessons, I was on a break for waiting for the next student to come, and I would peruse through the music books on the shelf in the music store, as I was very hungry for knowledge. I had to learn everything I could about music. I just, again, hungry for music knowledge. So I picked up this book called Modes for Improvising. I said, that's kind of interesting. I don't know what that is, but so I opened it up, thumbed through it, and I bought the book, took it home, and that was just, like a eureka moment for me. It was like my head just blew up, because I started to see that as I mentioned, the scale patterns, the things that I was playing that I didn't have a name for, now had a name. And I realized I was actually using some of the modes at the time, but I just didn't know what they were. So after spending some time with the book, I came up with sort of a way for me to think about applying the modes, and have used it pretty much ever since for myself and for students that I work with. And that idea is applying the principle of using the major scale to access a particular mode. And I'll explain here. I'll show you what I mean. When I showed you before the 7 modes based on the major diatonic scale, playing C to C, there's my C Ionian mode. When I played the second mode, D Dorian, there's my second mode. And I said, wait a minute, the D Dorian mode has the same notes as a C major scale. That's interesting. But it sounds different, obviously, than a C major scale. So I can think of the Dorian mode, since C is one whole step under D, I can think to myself, hey, I can just play a major scale one whole step under my key, and I'll have the Dorian mode. In other words, here's C major scale, here's D Dorian, same notes as the C major scale. So, and again, I said the Dorian mode is a minor sounding mode. So if I want to apply the Dorian mode, I can think to myself, just play a major scale one whole step under whatever key I want to use it in. D Dorian is the same as C major. So here's a D minor chord, and I can play a C major scale over it, but start on the D note, not the C note. And it fits perfectly. So the same concept I applied to each of the 7 modes. E Phrygian, being the third note in from the C scale, is actually 2 whole steps higher. So if I look at it from the perspective of E, and I say from E to C, what do I have to do to get from E to C? I went 2 whole steps down, 1, 2. So I can think E Phrygian, if I'm thinking for the key of E Phrygian is the same as a C major scale. And I applied that to all of the 7 modes. So one way to look at the modes is, again, if I'm just applying them all to a particular major scale pattern. And the difference here, or the reason for this is, as I showed you earlier, I played 7 modes starting from C, but each one had a particular fingering or different fingering pattern. If you just use the one fingering pattern for the major scale, out of that you can get each of the 7 modes within the same fingering pattern. And that's how I started to learn these modes. That's kind of clicked for me, like I said, many years ago when I started to study this book. So again, I'm going to show you now how I can apply that concept to all of the 7 modes. So if I want the Ionian mode, just play the scale that's built on the key that I'm in. If I'm in C and I want C Ionian mode, play a C major scale. If I want to play, let's say, D Dorian, a whole step under is C. So the rule for Dorian mode is play a major scale 1 whole step under your key. But emphasize, even though you're playing the major scale, emphasize the second tone, the D note, the D tone. Let's say if I'm using D as an example, I'm going to play a C scale, but don't emphasize the C note, emphasize the D note, or the note of the particular mode that you're in, that you want. For the Phrygian mode, I can play a major scale 2 whole steps under my key. For Lydian mode, I can play a major scale built on the 5th of my key. For the Mixolydian mode, I can play a major scale built on the 4th of my key. For the Aeolian mode, I can play a major scale built 1.5 steps above my key. And for the Locrian mode, I can play a major scale built 1/2 step above my key. Here I'll use a couple of examples in random keys to show you how I think about applying the modes or getting to the modes by thinking about accessing them to a major scale or relating them to a particular major scale. Again, if I want to use the first mode, the C Ionian mode, let's say if I'm in the key of C, just play a C major scale. And it sounds like that, okay? Let's say I'm in the key of A minor, because again, the Dorian is a minor sounding mode. So let's say I'm playing an A minor chord, or I want to play over that, something that's going to work with that. I think just play a major scale a whole step under my key. I'm in the key of A. What's a whole step under A? G. So just play a G scale against A minor, and you'll have Dorian mode. But if I play the G scale, but use the G note as the center, the note that I focus my center on, it's going to sound like a G major chord. That's not what I want. I want to play the same notes in that, use the same pattern, but focus on the second tone in that scale, which is A. Now it sounds like it belongs to that A minor chord, okay? So, rule of thumb, Dorian mode, play a major scale 1 whole step under your key. If you're in A minor, play a G scale. If you're in E minor, play a D scale. If you're in B flat, play an A flat scale. But focus, when you get to that scale, in other words, when you move the whole step down, don't focus on the key note of the major scale as your root note. Focus on the second tone in that major scale, because the second tone of the major scale is the Dorian mode. Hope that makes sense. Okay, Phrygian mode. I'll use E as an example, and again the Phrygian mode is also a minor sounding mode. Here's an E minor chord, here's an E note, my root. The rule of thumb for the Phrygian mode is to play a major scale 2 whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E, what's 2 whole steps under E? C. So I'm in E minor, but I'm going to play a C major scale. Now if I play the C major scale and emphasize from the C note, sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But the same scale pattern, but instead of emphasizing the root note C, I'm going to emphasize the third note, E, because that's the Phrygian mode, is the third mode of the major scale. So here's a C major scale, or the notes in the C major scale, but starting and ending on E. And it sounds like an E minor chord. So that's how that would work. The rule for the Lydian mode is to play a major scale built on the fifth of your key. Okay? Let's say, for an example, if I'm in the key of C, and again, the Lydian mode is a major sounding mode. So here's a C chord. If I play a C major scale, it sounds like it belongs to that, but it's an Ionian mode. If I play a G scale over that, here's a G scale. Sounds like a G major scale or G major chord, but if I just start on the fourth tone of the G major scale, which is C, and now play the G major scale but starting on the C note, now it sounds like the C chord. Okay, so the rule of thumb again for the using the Lydian mode is play a major scale built on the fifth of your key. Next mode is Mixolydian. The rule for this is play a major scale built on the fourth of your key. Again, if I'm in the key of C, what's the fourth of C? F. So I'll play an F scale over C, and I will have Mixolydian mode. Here's an F scale. It sounds like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do when I apply it to the F chord. But if I start on the C note, like I said, it will sound like this. And has that dominant sound because the Mixolydian is your dominant sounding mode. So the rule of thumb for that is whatever key you're in, if you want Mixolydian mode, play a major scale built on the fourth of your key. Aeolian mode. The Aeolian mode is the natural minor scale. Now, like the Ionian mode, the first mode is the major scale. The sixth mode, the Aeolian, is the natural minor scale. Okay? If you've ever heard the term or the phrase relative major minor, that's when you can have, or actually every key is actually two keys in one. A major key and a minor key can share the same notes, kind of like two sides of the same coin. For example, C major has no sharps or flats. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If I start on the sixth tone of the C scale, which is A, and play also all natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, I have now an A Aeolian mode or an A natural minor scale. Here's C to C, C major scale. Here's A natural minor, C major, A minor. So that phrase relative major minor means every key is actually two keys in one. It's which note you use as the key center to consider the the root note of the scale. Two sides of the same coin. C major scale has all natural notes. A minor scale has all natural notes, and that of course applies for any key. And that's how the Aeolian mode will work here, what I'm just about to show you. Using B as an example, B Aeolian mode, which is a natural minor scale, I can think of, flip that coin over, and B minor is actually the same as D major. So to get from B to D, I went 1.5 steps up, or 3 frets. So the rule for the Aeolian mode is you can play a major scale built 1 1/2 steps up above your key. If I'm in the key of B minor, and I want to play the Aeolian mode, but thinking of it again as applying it to a major scale, 1.5 steps above B is D. So I'll just play a D scale, or the notes in the D scale. There's a D major scale. Sounds like a D major chord, but if I use the B as my key center, same notes, but the key center shifted. I like to think of it in terms of like the key center is like the, let's say like the sun, and the other notes in the scale are like the planets revolving around the sun. So depending on which note you use as the key center, those planets or those other notes revolving around that will create a different sound, again because the sequence of steps what I did to get, from one note to the next to construct that. And the seventh mode is the Locrian mode, and the rule of thumb for that is play a major scale 1/2 step above your key. Let's say I'm in the key of E. 1/2 step above E is F. So if I'm in the key of E and I want to apply the Locrian mode or use the Locrian mode, I just think, what's a half step above E? F. So I'll just play an F scale. Now here's an F scale. Sounds like, again, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But if I start and stop on the 7th degree, which is E, it's going to sound like this. Okay, I just played the same notes as in an F scale, but using E as my key center, or now E is the sun, and the notes are revolving around that. If F is the sun, and the same notes revolving around it, will create this sound when F is the key center. When E is the key center, same notes, but the key center, now like I said, the sun, using that analogy, is now the center, and the way the notes revolve around that particular center is going to change the particular characteristic sound of that mode, because again, the sequence of steps have changed. So to review, if you want to play the Ionian mode, play a major scale where the root note is the same as the key that you're in, or the chord that you're in. You want C Ionian, play C major. For Dorian, play a major scale 1 whole step under your key. If you're in E, E Dorian is D, a D major. If you're in C, C Dorian is B flat major. For the Phrygian mode, 2 whole steps under your key. If I'm in the key of E and I want a Phrygian mode, play a C scale, because C is 2 whole steps under E. If I'm in the key of G and I want Lydian mode, play a D scale, because the Lydian mode, the rule for that is to play a scale a 5th above your key. For Mixolydian, play a major scale built a 4th above your key. If I'm in the key of E, play an A scale, because A is the 4th of E. If I'm in the key of G, play a C scale. And by the way, the interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode applies to harmonica, or harp as we call it. Like for, if you're playing blues, let's say you're playing Roadhouse Blues in the key of E, and somebody wants to play a harmonica to it, they need to use an A harp, not an E harp, because if they use the harmonica where the key is the same as the key that you're playing in a blues situation, not good, because you're going to have a clash with the natural 7th and the flat 7th. So with harmonica, as I said, it's the same kind of rule, because the Mixolydian mode gives you the blues sound, if you will, because it has a flat 7th. I'll get into that a little bit later in this video. So for all you harmonica players out there, if you're in the key of E, use an A harp. If you're in the key of B flat, use an E flat harp. And if you don't, not good. The rule for the Aeolian mode is you can play a major scale built 1 1/2 steps up above your key. If I'm in the key of B minor and I want to play the Aeolian mode, but thinking of it again as applying it to a major scale, 1 1/2 steps above B is D. So I'll just play a D scale, or the notes in the D scale. There's a D major scale. Sounds like a D major chord, but if I use the B as my key center, same notes, but the key center shifted. The final mode is the Locrian mode, and that's playing a major scale 1/2 step above your key. If you're in the key of E, play an F scale. If you're in the key of F, play an F sharp scale. If you're in the key of E flat, play an E scale, and you'll get that sound of the Locrian mode. But again, as with all the 7 modes, applying that principle of using it a major scale, to access it, you have to use the key note, not the key note of the major scale, except for the first Ionian mode, the first mode. For all the others, if you're using this principle, for Dorian, highlight the 2nd note. For Phrygian, highlight the 3rd note. For Lydian, highlight the 4th note, and so on and so on and so on. And that's a way to access the modes, by applying them to the major scale pattern. And again, the difference with this is if you just know one pattern for a major scale, you can access all 7 modes just starting on that particular note that you want. Now, as I just showed you, one way to access the modes is to just use a major scale and apply the principle of whatever distance you're traveling from the key that you're in. Again, if you are in the key, let's say you're in A and you want the Dorian mode, you play a whole step under, which would be a G major scale. If you're in, let's say, C and you want Mixolydian mode, you play major scale built on the fourth, which is F. And like I said, I just went through the 7 modes, how to access them that way. There's another way that you can access or think about the modes, and that's in terms of thinking them relating to either the first mode, which is Ionian, or the major scale, and the 6th mode, the Aeolian, which is the natural minor scale. Because remember, there are 3 chord categories: major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The major type chords would have the natural 3rd and the natural 7th. The minor type chords have a flat 3rd and a flat 7th, and the dominant chord type family has a natural 3rd and a flat 7th. So there are 2 major modes, or 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian. Here's a C Ionian mode. C major scale, C Ionian mode. If I want to play a Lydian mode in the key of C, as I showed you earlier, I could think of play a major scale built on the 5th, which is G. If I look at a G scale, what is it unique about a G scale? It has an F sharp in it. Now if I go back to my C Ionian mode, and I have all natural notes, but if I want to turn this into a Lydian mode, I can sharp the 4th, make the F sharp, and that would be the same as playing a G scale, but starting and ending on C. So a C Lydian, or any Lydian mode, is a major scale with a raised 4th. Here's a C major scale, C Ionian mode. If I raise that 4th tone from F to F sharp, okay, the F sharp means that I'm now really playing the same notes that are in a G scale, because a G scale, the key of G, has an F sharp. So a way to think of the Lydian mode is a major scale with a raised 4th. You see Lydian, and that one note right, has kind of a haunting, at least that's how it sounds to me, like a haunting type of a characteristic sound to it. So here's a C major chord, C Ionian mode. Sounds like it belongs, but if I raise the 4th, now I have, if I play a C major 7 sharp 11 chord, because the sharp 11th is an octave higher than the sharp 4th, that F sharp note changes everything, a whole different characteristic sound. So 2 major sounding modes, Ionian, which is the major scale, and Lydian, which is a major scale with a raised 4th. Just take any major scale, raise the 4th tone, and you have a Lydian mode. I'll apply that same principle to the minor modes. There are 4 minor modes. If I take, for example, because I was using the key of C major, and I said that, relative major minor concept, flip the coin over. C major is the same as A minor. So here's an A natural minor scale, or an A Aeolian mode. It's the natural minor scale, the 6th mode, all natural notes. Okay, one of the other 4 minor modes is the Dorian mode. Now another way I could think of the Dorian mode, or access that, is taking the natural minor scale and raising the 6th tone. Okay, here's an A Aeolian mode, right? So if I'm in the key of A and I want to play the Dorian mode, A Dorian, as I said earlier, is the same as G major. G major has an F sharp in it. A Dorian has an F sharp. Here's an A natural minor scale. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Sounds like an A minor chord. But if I want to use the Dorian mode, as I said, one of the other ways to look at it is just play the natural minor scale, the Aeolian mode, and raise the sixth tone. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth tone of A minor is F. If I sharp that to F sharp, I just played in A Dorian mode because, like I said earlier, A Dorian is the same as G major. G major has an F sharp in it. So since A natural minor has no sharps or flats, if I wanted to turn it into an A Dorian mode, I can sharp the sixth tone. So take a minor scale, sharp the sixth tone, you have a Dorian mode. Another one of the minor modes is the Phrygian mode. And a way to access the Phrygian mode, applying it with, or looking at it from the same idea of accessing it from a natural minor scale, is a natural minor scale with a flat second. Okay? A Phrygian is the same as an F major scale. Remember, I said earlier, the Phrygian mode is 2 whole steps under your key. 2 whole steps under A is F. An F scale, or the key of F, has a B flat. Right there. So if I go to the A Aeolian mode, or A natural minor scale, and say, hey, where's that B note? It's my second tone. I flat it. Instead of A, B, C, I got A, B flat, C. And so 1 flat and the rest natural. Here's an A natural minor scale, or A Aeolian mode. All natural notes. Now if I flat the second tone and to make B, B flat, sound like this. There's your Phrygian mode. Another way of thinking about it. A natural minor scale with a flat second. And the Locrian mode, another way to look at the Locrian mode, is a natural minor scale with a flat second and a flat fifth. Here's A natural minor. Now if I flat the second tone, which is B, and the fifth tone, which is E, and play B flat and E flat instead, I'm going to have an A Locrian mode. Now, what's interesting here to see as well is I just showed you the Phrygian mode is like a natural minor scale with a flat second, and the Locrian mode is like a natural minor scale with a flat second and a flat fifth. So the Phrygian, if I'm playing Phrygian and I just want to turn that into Locrian, flat the fifth of the Phrygian, and now I have Locrian. And what's interesting about that is I'll show you in a little bit when we connect these two pentatonic and blues scales, how that can kind of tie in. Okay, a Mixolydian mode falls into the dominant chord category, and only one mode fits into that. Again, there are 2 major sounding modes, Ionian and Lydian, 4 minor modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian, and 1 dominant sounding mode, the Mixolydian, for your bluesy sounding chords, 7ths, 9ths, and, all those kind of chords like that. The Mixolydian mode is a major scale with a flat 7th. Here's C Ionian mode, a C major scale. And sounds like C major. If I flat the 7th of C, the 7th tone of C is B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I flat that and play B flat instead, you can hear clearly that it sounds like a dominant sounding chord. So the Mixolydian mode is a major scale or an Ionian mode with a flat 7th. And again, as I said earlier, that's, works with that whole idea of when you're playing harmonica or harp in a blues situation, you want to use the Mixolydian mode because the Mixolydian mode has the flat 7th, and that's what gives it that bluesier sound, if you will. So to summarize what I just went over, another way to access the modes by relating them to either the major scale, which is the Ionian mode, or the natural minor scale, which is the Aeolian mode. Being that there are two major modes, the Ionian mode is the major scale, the Lydian mode is a major scale with a raised fourth. There are four minor modes. The Aeolian mode is the natural minor scale. The Dorian mode is a natural minor scale with a raised sixth tone. The Phrygian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat second tone. The Locrian mode is a natural minor scale with a flat second and a flat fifth tone. And the Mixolydian mode is a major scale or an Ionian mode with a flat seventh degree. So that's another way to access all seven modes, or another way to, think about them. When using the modes for different applications, such as soloing, improvising, maybe creating lines for original music, you can always mix them up with the correct pentatonic and or blues scales for more options. And when I say the correct, remember there are only two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two types of blues scales, major and minor. And the blues scales are kind of like offshoots of the pentatonic scales. Here's a C major pentatonic scale. It's a five-tone scale, hence the name penta. Okay. Done. That's the scale. And I'll just continue on with other octaves. But second octave. Okay, so here's a C major pentatonic across 6 strings. Sounds like a C chord. If I add in this E flat note, which acts as a passing tone between the second and third tone of the scale, I'm turning this into a C major blues scale. Still sounds like C, right? But if I sit on this passing tone, it's going to clash with the major chord that I'm, aligning it up with. A C major chord has an E natural. This passing tone is an E flat. It's going to clash with that. But if I use it just like I said as a passing tone, it's a smooth transition, and you just get this nice little bridge between those two notes, and it will work. Right? Okay. The same goes with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues. Here's an A minor pentatonic, a five-tone scale. Probably the first scale you learn. That goes for me as well. When you first start out, that's your sort of first rock scale or blues scale that you learn, so you can play some solos. If I add that same tone, that E flat, into this scale, this minor pentatonic, now it's a passing tone between the fourth and the fifth degree of the scale, but it still works nicely. Okay? And the fact that it sits in both of these, the C major pentatonic and the A minor pentatonic, that it sits well as a passing tone in both of those scales. It goes back to, remember I talked earlier about the relative major minor concept. A C Ionian mode, or a C major scale, has all natural notes. Flip that to the other side of the coin, an A minor scale, or an A natural minor scale, which is the Aeolian mode, also has no sharps and no flats, all natural notes. So C major, A minor are related in that regard. Same with the pentatonics and the blues. C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, C major blues, A minor blues. Okay, you have that relationship, relative major minor. The fact that there were only two pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two blues scales, major and minor, and there are three categories, regarding the modes, mixing them up with the correct pentatonic and the correct blues scale is what you want to be able to do. The two major sounding modes, again, are the Ionian and the Lydian, so you can play Ionian mode, Lydian mode, and also mix them up with major pentatonic and or major blues. There are 4 minor modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. You can mix those up with the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues. And the one mode that kind of stands on its own is the Mixolydian, and the Mixolydian mode being like your bluesy sounding mode that works with bluesy chords, you know, sevenths, ninths, you know, thirteens, you know, all the chords in the dominant family. The interesting thing about the Mixolydian mode is it will mix up with both major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales. So both pentatonics and both blues will mix with the Mixolydian. That's the only mode that has that attribute. With the other 6 modes, you can only mix them up with either a major pentatonic and a major blues, or a minor pentatonic and a minor blues. Otherwise, you're going to hear some bad stuff that you don't want to hear. Clams. Buddy Rich used to refer to bad notes as clams. A little trivia for you there. Okay, so again, when you're mixing the modes with the pentatonic scale, make sure you're using the correct pentatonic and or blues scale. But with the Mixolydian mode, you don't have to consider that. They'll both work. Okay, the difference is in the the Mixolydian mode, or in the blues category, if you're using the major pentatonic or major blues, it's going to sound like it belongs to that, or okay, it's going to sound like it belongs to that as well. Because when you're playing blues, you're really playing usually minor pentatonic type scales, minor blues scales, but the major pentatonics and the major blues scales, again, will work with the Mixolydian mode. So mess around with this stuff, use your ears, and your ears will really tell you what works and what doesn't. Now, since there are 2 major type modes, 4 minor type modes, and 1 dominant type mode, you may ask, well, which one should I use in a particular situation, in a specific music genre? The dominant, obviously, there's nothing to consider because there's only one of them, just one dominant mode, the Mixolydian mode, and that will work for your dominant family chords, 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13th, what have you. Mixolydian mode, you're good to go. There are 2 major type modes, Ionian and Lydian. Both will work in the major chord family. Here's a C major chord, here's a C Ionian mode. It's going to match that chord, or major 7ths, it's going to work with any of those chords, anything in the major family. The Lydian mode, being that it has a raised 4th, it's an Ionian mode with a raised 4th, right? So it has, instead of an F, it has an F sharp. You may want to alter the chord, but it still sits in the major family. Like, in other words, here's a C major 7th chord. If I change that G, if I just make it a sharp 4th, an F sharp, C major 7, flat 5, now it's going to match with that. Or a C major 7 sharp 11 chord, that F sharp note really sticks out, that sharp 4. So Lydian mode will really sit nicely over a chord like that. Okay, 4 minor modes. Again, this is just an opinion. The Dorian mode works well with jazz, let's say rock, jazz rock, but not really metal so much, or fusion music so much, if you will. Let's say guitar players like Carlos Santana, Duane Allman, Dickie Betts, on those extended jams, like Elizabeth Reed, Whipping Post, that the Allman Brothers were very well known for, and of course in a minor key. Let's say you have just a chord cycle, A minor 7. That was the Dorian mode. I'm in A minor. That was an A Dorian mode. Sits really nice. Okay, so Dorian mode will sit nicely in that type of genre. Rock, not too heavy, jazz rock, if you will, in a minor key, of course. Sound like Carlos Santana, you're good to go. Phrygian is more suited for like fusion, like my shredding fusion type stuff. There's your Phrygian mode, okay? Again, A minor. So Phrygian, great for shredding, like, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Yngwie Malmsteen, definitely make use of the Phrygian mode. The Aeolian mode is your natural minor scale, and good for metal and bands like Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Metallica. Of course, if you're playing in a minor key or just heavy music like with power chords, the Aeolian mode is a perfect scale, a perfect mode to use for that. And of course, mixed in with the minor pentatonic, minor blues scales. And the Locrian mode is also good for, in my opinion, fusion type, jazz rock fusion, shredding, high-speed shredding type stuff. Okay, works with that. And I said earlier that the Phrygian mode is good for jazz rock fusion, and the Locrian is good for jazz rock fusion as well. And you might say, well, which one? Okay, and they both will work well in that genre. And if you look at the two together, there's a comparison that's nice to see. Here's an A Phrygian mode. Okay, here's an A Locrian mode. The difference is, if I compare those two, the Locrian is like a Phrygian mode with a flat 5. Here's a Phrygian mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now if I flat that fifth tone, here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have a Locrian mode. So they both sit well in that genre. And what's also interesting to see here, remember I said that because these are minor modes, they can mix with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues scale. Remember, the minor blues scale has that flat fifth in there, so that flat fifth is seen in the minor pentatonic, and it's also seen in the Locrian mode. So just, interesting comparisons between the two scales when you see notes that, overlap. Okay? The Mixolydian mode, as I said, there's nothing to consider, like which one should I use or not, because again, the Mixolydian mode is the only dominant mode, and that will work in your dominant family of chords, sevenths, ninths, whatever, your bluesy sounding chords, or funk music. Play a ninth chord, use the Mixolydian mode, and you'll have some nice things that you can draw from. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and as I said at the beginning, if the study of modes is new to you, I hope you will get a lot out of this and embrace these concepts to help to bring your playing to another level. If the study of modes isn't new to you, I hope you might get something out of this, maybe another way to look at the modes or another way to think about accessing them. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. And I encourage you to check out my videos on the individual modes, all 7 modes, and my video on the pentatonic and blues scales for a much deeper dive on all of these scales and modes, with lots of examples highlighting how the modes sound in different musical applications. I'm Dan Beagleman, and those are the 7 modes based on the major diatonic scale. Have a nice day.